A message is sent. It leaves a phone, a laptop, a server rack in a climate-controlled room. It crosses a city, then a country, then an ocean. It arrives somewhere else in a fraction of a second, intact and complete, as if distance barely exists. Nothing about this feels remarkable anymore. Video calls connect people on opposite sides of the world without delay. Financial transactions clear across continents, faster than human reaction time. Entire libraries of information appear instantly when requested. The experience suggests weightlessness, an impression that data floats. It does not. Almost everything that moves across the global internet travels through glass fibers no thicker than a garden hose, resting on the ocean floor. Not satellites. Not wireless beams bouncing through space. Physical cables, laid deliberately across thousands of miles of seabed. They cross trenches deeper than the Grand Canyon. They curve around underwater mountains. They avoid seismic fault lines when possible and accept them when they cannot. They lie exposed to anchors, fishing equipment, currents, and time. Every message depends on them. The speed feels abstract because the distance is hidden. A signal moves at close to the speed of light, but it still takes time to cross an ocean. Engineers measure that time in milliseconds. Traders notice it. Gamers feel it. Most people never think about it at all. The system is designed that way. When communication works, it disappears. A web page loads. A file syncs. A voice arrives clearly from thousands of miles away. The experience feels immediate, even intimate. The machinery behind it fades from awareness. That invisibility is not accidental. It is the product of decades of design choices that prioritize reliability over spectacle, redundancy over elegance, maintenance over novelty. Undersea cables are not rare infrastructure. They are common, layered, and constantly in use. Hundreds of them span the oceans, connecting continents through routes that were chosen carefully and sometimes reluctantly. New ones are added. Old ones are repaired. Traffic shifts continuously between them without announcement. Most failures never make the news because most failures never interrupt service. A cable is damaged by a ship's anchor. Traffic reroutes. Latency increases slightly. Engineers schedule a repair. A specialized vessel sails out, locates the break, lifts the cable from the seabed, splices it, and lowers it back into place. Weeks may pass. Users rarely notice. This quiet resilience creates a misleading impression. It makes the global internet feel inevitable, self-sustaining, and immaterial, as if it exists independently of geography, politics, and physical constraint. It does not. Every undersea cable has landing points on shore. Those points exist within national borders. They are owned by companies. They are regulated, protected, and sometimes contested. Decisions about where cables run, who builds them, and who maintains them shape how information moves across the world. These decisions are rarely visible to the people who rely on the results. The internet feels global because its backbone is cooperative. It spans jurisdictions, companies, and oceans through shared agreements that prioritize continuity. No single entity controls the whole network. No central authority directs every signal. What holds it together is alignment. Standards that allow systems to talk to one another. Redundancy that absorbs damage without drama. Crews who work in isolation, far from public view, keeping glass fibers intact on the ocean floor. The cables beneath the ocean do not carry content in any meaningful sense. They carry trust. The expectation that when a message is sent, it will arrive. That distance will be bridged quietly. That the system will hold. This expectation has reshaped how the world works. Economies synchronize in real time. Decisions are made with current information rather than delayed reports. Relationships stretch across continents without friction. All of it depends on infrastructure most people will never see. To understand how global communication became instant, you have to look away from screens and into the ocean. To understand its vulnerabilities, you have to look at how something so physical supports something that feels so intangible. Because the internet is not floating above the world. It is anchored to it, mile after mile, resting quietly on the seabed. Part 1. Before the cables. Before information could cross oceans in seconds, it crossed them slowly, and that slowness shaped how the world worked. News traveled at the speed of ships. Letters were written with the understanding that responses might not arrive for months, if they arrived at all. Decisions were made using information that was already outdated by the time it reached its destination. This was not considered a failure of communication. It was simply how distance behaved. Merchants placed orders without knowing current prices. Governments issued instructions that could not be revised once they were sent. Military commanders acted without confirmation that conditions elsewhere had changed. Entire strategies unfolded on assumptions that might no longer be true. Delay was built into everything. Markets learned to tolerate uncertainty because there was no alternative. Prices moved slowly because information moved slowly. Risk was absorbed through margin and patience rather than real-time adjustment. Communication shaped trust in different ways. Agreements relied more on reputation than verification. A promise mattered because there was no immediate way to check compliance. Disputes took months to resolve, if they were resolved at all. By the time a problem was known, the people involved might already be unreachable. This favored stability over speed. Trade routes were durable because they changed slowly. Relationships persisted because replacing them was costly. Power rested with those who controlled physical movement rather than information flow. The first attempts to reduce this delay focused on visibility rather than immediacy. Signal fires, semaphore systems, and courier networks extended the reach of messages, but they did not eliminate lag. Information still arrived in stages, and each stage introduced uncertainty. The electric telegraph was the first real break from this pattern. For the first time, information could move faster than people or goods. Messages traveled along wires stretched across land, compressing time in ways that felt almost unnatural. A decision made in one city could be known in another before the day ended, but oceans remained a barrier. Underwater transmission posed problems that were not immediately solvable. Saltwater interfered with signals, pressure, damaged insulation, cables snapped under their own weight. Early efforts failed repeatedly. The ocean did not cooperate. As long as continents were separated by water, communication across them remained asynchronous. Even the fastest ship introduced delay. Even the most disciplined system had to wait. This shaped global coordination. Financial markets operated in loosely coupled cycles. Political decisions unfolded with long gaps between action and response. Crises evolved without immediate feedback from afar. The world was connected, but not synchronized. That lack of synchronization limited scale. It was possible to trade globally, but not to coordinate globally. It was possible to communicate, but not to collaborate in real time. Distance imposed friction that could not be engineered away with better organization alone. The desire to close that gap did not come from curiosity, it came from necessity. As economies grew more interdependent, the cost of delay rose. Prices fluctuated faster than news could travel. Decisions made without current information became riskier. The old tolerance for lag began to strain. The problem was not that communication was slow. It was that the world was becoming too fast for delay to remain acceptable. This tension set the stage for attempts to carry signals across the ocean floor. Not because it was easy, not because it was obvious, but because the alternative was to let distance continue to dictate the limits of coordination. The ocean would have to be crossed, not by ships carrying messages, but by something quieter, more fragile, and far more demanding of precision. That effort would fail many times before it succeeded. Part 2. The first attempts to connect continents. The idea of laying a cable across the ocean did not begin as a bold technological vision. It began as a practical frustration. If information could move quickly across land, why should water stop it? Early engineers understood the principle. A conductive path could carry a signal. Insulation could protect it. In theory, the ocean was simply a longer, deeper version of terrain. They already knew how to cross. In practice, it was nothing like land. The first undersea cables were heavy, stiff, and poorly suited to the environment they were dropped into. They were lowered from ships that could not accurately control tension or placement. They sank unevenly. They twisted. They snapped under their own weight long before reaching the seabed. Even when a cable survived deployment, new problems emerged. Signals weakened quickly over long distances. Electrical current leaked into seawater through imperfect insulation. Messages arrived, garbled, delayed, or not at all. What worked across a river or a bay did not scale to thousands of miles of open ocean. Early successes were often temporary. A cable would function for days or weeks, long enough to prove the concept, then fail without warning. Engineers struggled to determine where breaks occurred or how to repair them. The ocean concealed its damage efficiently. Each failure forced a reconsideration of assumptions. Cables had to be lighter without becoming fragile. Insulation had to be durable without interfering with signal transmission. Deployment had to be controlled with far more precision than ships of the era were designed to provide. Progress came slowly, through repetition rather than breakthroughs. Engineers learned to account for depth and pressure. Cable designs evolved to include multiple protective layers. Signal theory advanced as researchers began to understand how electrical impulses behaved over extreme distances. The work was expensive and uncertain. Investors grew impatient. Governments questioned the value of projects that failed publicly and repeatedly. Success was difficult to demonstrate because it rarely lasted long enough to feel reliable. And yet, the effort continued. Each partial success proved that instant transoceanic communication was possible. Each failure clarified what still needed to be solved. The stakes were high enough to justify persistence. When a cable did work, even briefly, its impact was immediate. Markets reacted faster. Diplomatic correspondence compressed. Information that once took weeks to arrive could be exchanged in minutes. The difference was not incremental. It was transformative. That transformation created pressure. Once instant communication became imaginable, delay became intolerable. The old pace of coordination felt inefficient, even reckless. The world did not slow down while technology caught up. The ocean still resisted. Storms dragged cables across rough seabeds. Seismic activity shifted terrain. Anchors and fishing gear damaged exposed sections. Every new connection introduced new vulnerabilities. Reliability became the central challenge. It was no longer enough to prove that a cable could work. It had to work continuously. It had to survive an environment that could not be controlled. It had to be repairable without starting from scratch. This forced a shift in mindset. Undersea communication would not be a one-time construction project. It would be an ongoing relationship with the ocean. Cables would have to be monitored, maintained, and eventually replaced. The system would need redundancy, not as a luxury, but as a requirement. Multiple routes reduced dependence on any single path. Overlapping coverage allowed traffic to reroute when damage occurred. Failure became something to plan for rather than something to prevent entirely. By the time truly durable transoceanic cables emerged, the lesson was clear. Connecting continents was not about conquering the ocean. It was about accepting its conditions and designing systems that could endure them. That lesson would shape every generation of undersea communication that followed. Part 3. How data actually moves underwater. It is easy to imagine undersea cables as conduits, carrying messages the way pipes carry water. Information goes in one end, travels through, and emerges intact on the other side. That metaphor breaks down quickly. Modern undersea cables do not transmit electricity in the way early telegraph lines did. They carry light. Pulses of laser light encoded with information travel through strands of glass thinner than a human hair. These strands are bundled together, protected by layers of insulation, steel, and shielding, then laid carefully across the ocean floor. The signal itself is intangible, but the system that carries it is not. Light travels fast, but it does not travel forever. Over long distances, even inside fiber, signals weaken, they scatter, they lose coherence. To compensate, undersea cables include repeaters placed at regular intervals along the route. These devices amplify the signal, restoring it before it degrades beyond recognition. Repeaters are sealed, pressurized units designed to operate unattended for decades. Once a cable is laid, they cannot be accessed without lifting the entire line from the seabed. Failure is not an option. Reliability is engineered in at the component level because repair is slow, expensive, and disruptive. This shapes how cables are designed. Paths are chosen to minimize risk. Routes avoid areas of heavy shipping traffic when possible. They skirt known fault lines. They follow relatively stable seabed contours. In shallow waters near shore, cables are often buried to protect them from anchors and fishing gear. In deep ocean, they rest exposed, relying on depth and isolation for protection. The geography of the ocean matters. Submarine canyons, seamounts, and continental shelves influence where cables can safely run. Political geography matters as well. Cables must make landfall somewhere, and those landing points exist within national jurisdictions. Each choice involves negotiation, regulation, and long-term commitment. Once laid, cables do not carry traffic in isolation. They are part of a network. Data entering the system does not follow a single predetermined path. It is routed dynamically based on availability, congestion, and policy. If one cable becomes overloaded or damaged, traffic shifts to others automatically. This rerouting happens constantly, even under normal conditions. Internet traffic ebbs and flows by time of day, by region, by event. Streaming peaks in the evening. Financial traffic spikes during market hours. Video calls surge during global meetings. The system adjusts continuously, distributing load across available paths. Most of this happens without human intervention. Routing protocols evaluate conditions and make decisions in milliseconds. They do not optimize for distance alone. They consider latency, capacity, reliability, and cost. The fastest path is not always the shortest. The most direct route is not always the best. This complexity is hidden from users by design. A video call feels direct, even though its data may traverse multiple cables, pass through several countries, and be handed off between networks owned by different entities. The experience is seamless because the system is cooperative. That cooperation is fragile in subtle ways. Cables are privately owned, often by consortia of telecommunications companies, cloud providers, and infrastructure firms. Each participant invests capital in exchange for capacity. Agreements govern how traffic is shared, prioritized, and billed. These arrangements are invisible to users but critical to performance. When a cable is damaged, traffic shifts according to these agreements. Some paths have more spare capacity than others. Some regions have multiple redundant connections. Others rely on a small number of routes. This unevenness creates differences in resilience. In heavily connected regions, cable failures may result in slightly higher latency or reduced bandwidth that few people notice. In less connected regions, the same failure can cause significant disruption because alternatives are limited. The system is global, but it is not uniform. This is why undersea cables are not just technical infrastructure. They are economic and political artifacts. Where they run reflects patterns of trade, investment, and influence. Who builds them shapes who benefits most from connectivity. Despite this complexity, the system is remarkably stable. Most data travels across oceans without incident. Most cables operate for decades. Most failures are localized and managed quietly. This stability does not come from perfection. It comes from redundancy, monitoring, and an acceptance that failure will occur. The internet works not because cables never break, but because the network is designed to expect that they will. That expectation allows communication to feel effortless, even as it depends on glass fibers resting silently on the ocean floor, carrying light across distances that once took months to cross by ship. The system holds because it is physical, deliberate, and constantly adjusted, and because its most important work happens out of sight. Part 4. Laying and maintaining the network. Undersea cables are not placed casually. Before a single length of cable is manufactured, the route is surveyed in detail. Specialized ships map the ocean floor, measuring depth, slope, sediment type, and obstacles. They look for stable terrain, avoiding sharp gradients where cables could suspend and fatigue over time. They identify areas of seismic activity and regions heavily trafficked by ships or fishing fleets. The goal is not to find a perfect path. It is to find a survivable one. Once a route is chosen, cable-laying ships take over. These vessels are built for precision rather than speed. They move slowly, feeding cable into the water under carefully controlled tension. Too much tension and the cable snaps. Too little and it loops or twists as it sinks. In shallow water, the work is more complicated. Near shore, cables are most vulnerable. Anchors drag across the seabed, fishing gear scrapes and snags. Construction activity disturbs sediment. To protect against this, cables are often buried beneath the seabed using plows or jetting tools that cut narrow trenches and lay the cable inside. This process is deliberate and slow. Each section is monitored as it settles. Crews track depth, position, and tension continuously. Once buried, the cable is harder to damage, but also harder to repair. Every choice involves trade-offs that will matter years later. Farther offshore, depth becomes protection. In the deep ocean, cables rest directly on the seabed. At those depths, human activity is rare. The cable lies quietly, shaped by gravity and terrain, exposed but largely undisturbed. There is no trench, no covering, just the weight of the cable and the stability of the ocean floor. Maintenance begins the moment the cable is activated. Sensors track signal strength and latency. Subtle changes can indicate degradation or damage long before a complete failure occurs. Operators monitor traffic patterns and rerouting behavior, watching for anomalies that suggest a problem along a particular path. When a cable does fail, the response is methodical. The location of the break is estimated using signal analysis. Repair ships are dispatched, sometimes traveling thousands of miles to reach the site. Once there, the ship lowers grappling equipment to the seabed, locates the cable, and lifts the damaged section to the surface. This can take days. Weather matters. Sea conditions determine whether the ship can hold position accurately enough to work. Strong currents complicate retrieval. Depth increases difficulty. Every repair is a negotiation with the environment. At the surface, technicians cut out the damaged segment and splice in a new section. The connection is sealed, tested, and reinforced. Then the cable is lowered back to the seabed, carefully returned to its original path or adjusted slightly to avoid the conditions that caused the failure. The work is precise and patient. There is no urgency to make it visible. The system has already rerouted traffic. Service may be degraded, but it continues. Repair crews focus on doing the job correctly rather than quickly. This approach reflects a broader philosophy. Undersea cables are designed to be maintained, not admired. They are expected to age. They are expected to fail occasionally. Their value lies not in avoiding every incident, but in being repairable without disrupting the entire system. Most users never notice this work. A cable can be out of service for weeks while messages continue to flow. Latency may increase slightly. Bandwidth may tighten during peak periods. These effects are subtle enough to be absorbed without comment. This invisibility reinforces the illusion that the internet is resilient by nature. In reality, it is resilient by effort. Teams track cables continuously. Ships stand ready. Replacement segments are manufactured and stored. Agreements are in place to prioritize repairs because downtime has consequences, even when those consequences are diffuse. The ocean does not respect infrastructure. Currents shift. Earthquakes occur. Human activity expands into new areas. Each change introduces new risks that were not present when a cable was laid. The network adapts by adding routes, improving monitoring, and refining repair processes. Old cables are retired, new ones are installed alongside them, increasing capacity and redundancy. There is no final version of the system. It evolves quietly, responding to conditions that most people never consider. The work is repetitive, technical, and largely thankless, but it is what keeps the digital world connected. Without maintenance, the cables would not hold. Without planning, repairs would take too long. Without redundancy, failures would be visible and disruptive. The undersea network survives not because it is hidden, but because it is tended, and that tending never stops. Part 5. When cables fail. Undersea cables fail far more often than most people realize. Not dramatically, not all at once. In small, localized ways that the system is built to absorb. The most common causes are ordinary. Ship anchors drag across the seabed. Fishing trawls snag lines while working familiar grounds. Sediment shifts after storms or earthquakes. Over time, even a well-laid cable can fatigue under constant pressure and movement. None of this is surprising to the engineers who design the network. Failure is assumed. What matters is how the system responds when it happens. When a cable is damaged, data does not stop moving. Traffic is rerouted automatically through alternate paths. Routing protocols detect the loss of capacity and adjust in milliseconds. The user experience changes only slightly, if at all. A web page may load a fraction of a second slower. A video stream may drop in quality briefly. A connection may feel less responsive during peak hours. most users never notice. This invisibility is intentional. The system is designed to degrade gracefully rather than collapse. Redundancy is layered geographically so that a single failure does not isolate entire regions. Multiple cables connect major hubs. Traffic spreads across them continuously. Where redundancy is limited, failures are felt more clearly. Island nations and less connected regions may rely on only a few cables. When one goes down, alternatives are scarce. Bandwidth tightens. Latency increases. In extreme cases, connectivity may be reduced significantly until repairs are completed. Even then, communication rarely stops entirely. The system prioritizes essential traffic. Critical services continue operating. Less time-sensitive data waits. The internet narrows rather than disappears. This narrowing can feel like failure to users who expect constant performance. But from an infrastructure perspective, it is success. The network is doing exactly what it was designed to do. It is protecting continuity by sacrificing quality temporarily. It is choosing partial service over interruption. Repair work proceeds in parallel. Once a failure is detected and localized, repair ships are dispatched. Depending on location and conditions, it may take days or weeks to complete the fix. The timeline is governed by distance, weather, and depth, not urgency. This mismatch between physical repair time and digital expectation creates tension. People are accustomed to instant resolution. Software updates happen overnight. Services restore quickly. Undersea cables do not operate on that timeline. They require ships, crews, and favorable conditions. They require patience. During this period, the system leans heavily on redundancy. Traffic shifts persistently. Some routes become congested. Operators monitor performance and adjust policies to manage load. Engineers watch for secondary failures that could compound the problem. The goal is stability, not speed. This approach contrasts sharply with how outages are often portrayed. Headlines describe cable cuts as threats to global connectivity. Maps show severed lines dramatically. The implication is fragility. The reality is more restrained. Cables fail regularly. The internet does not. This distinction matters because it reveals where resilience actually lives. It is not in preventing every incident. It is in building systems that expect them and continue functioning anyway. Failures become events to manage rather than crises to fear. This does not mean the system is invulnerable. Multiple failures in the same region can strain capacity. Coordinated damage, whether accidental or intentional, poses greater challenges. But even then, the response relies on the same principles: reroute, prioritize, repair. There is no panic switch, only procedures. This steady response is why most cable failures never become stories. They are absorbed into the background of normal operation. The system bends, adjusts, and holds. When communication feels uninterrupted, it is not because nothing went wrong. It is because something did, and the system worked around it quietly. That quiet competence is the defining feature of the undersea cable network. It is not dramatic. It is dependable. And it is maintained with the assumption that failure is inevitable, but collapse is not. Part 6. Power, Ownership, and Geography. Undersea cables feel neutral because their effects are universal. Messages arrive. Calls connect. Data moves. The experience is the same, regardless of who built the infrastructure beneath it. The ownership is not. Undersea cables are private assets. They are financed, built, and operated by consortia of telecommunications companies, cloud providers, and infrastructure firms. Governments regulate landing points and territorial access, but they rarely own the cables themselves. This arrangement developed gradually. Early cables were often state-backed because the value of instant communication was strategic as well as commercial. Over time, as traffic volumes grew and costs fell, private investment took the lead. Capacity could be sold, bandwidth could be leased, connectivity became a business. Today, the largest cable owners are not governments. They are companies whose core products depend on data moving quickly and reliably. Cloud platforms invest in cables to control latency. Content providers build routes to serve growing demand. Telecommunications firms expand capacity to remain competitive. This changes how the network evolves. Routes are chosen based on traffic patterns, market demand, and geopolitical feasibility. Regions with strong economic ties attract more cables. Areas perceived as unstable or less profitable receive fewer connections. The result is uneven resilience. Highly connected regions benefit from redundancy and competition. Multiple cables follow different paths, providing alternatives when one fails. Latency is low. Capacity is abundant. Less connected regions rely on fewer routes. When those routes are disrupted, the effects are felt more strongly. Connectivity becomes fragile, not because of poor design, but because of limited investment. Geography reinforces these patterns. Cables must come ashore somewhere. Landing stations become points of concentration where global traffic funnels through local infrastructure. These sites require power, security, and political stability. They are integrated into national regulatory frameworks and subject to local law. This gives countries influence over how data enters and leaves their territory. Most of the time, that influence is exercised quietly through permitting, inspection, and oversight. Rarely it becomes a point of tension. Disputes over access, surveillance, or control can shape where new cables are allowed to land. These decisions ripple outward. A route diverted to avoid one jurisdiction increases latency elsewhere. A landing denied shifts investment to neighboring regions. The physical path of the Internet reflects political realities as much as technical ones. Despite this, the system remains cooperative. Cables often connect competitors. Shared ownership spreads risk and cost. Agreements govern maintenance, capacity sharing, and repair responsibilities. No single entity controls the entire network because no single entity could sustain it alone. This shared structure is a form of quiet governance. Standards enable interoperability. Contracts enforce behavior. Trust is built through repetition and reliability rather than authority. When disputes arise, they are resolved through negotiation rather than disruption because disruption harms everyone involved. This does not eliminate power dynamics. Those who control major routes have leverage. Those who host landing points wield influence. Those who finance new cables shape future connectivity. But this power is exercised indirectly. The undersea network does not announce hierarchy. It expresses it through latency, capacity, and redundancy, through which connections are fastest, which regions recover quickest from failure, which markets can assume constant availability. These differences accumulate over time. They shape where businesses locate, where data centers are built, where digital services feel seamless or strained. The cables beneath the ocean quietly influence economic geography without ever appearing on a map most people see. This influence is rarely acknowledged because it works best when it is invisible. The Internet feels borderless because its backbone is cooperative. That cooperation persists not because it is guaranteed, but because it has proven mutually beneficial. The system endures by aligning incentives rather than imposing control. That alignment, like the cables themselves, rests on physical routes, private agreements, and the expectation that continuity matters more than dominance. The network holds not because it is owned by everyone, but because no one can afford for it to fail. Part 7. The physical Internet. It is tempting to think of the Internet as something that exists above the world. Screens reinforce that illusion. Information appears without weight or friction. Messages arrive instantly. Distance feels irrelevant. Undersea cables quietly contradict that story. They remind us that global communication is not abstract. It is physical, routed through specific places, dependent on materials that age, crews that work, and agreements that hold. Every message crosses terrain that had to be surveyed, negotiated, financed, and maintained. This physicality is not a weakness. It is what makes reliability possible. Glass fibers resting on the ocean floor are predictable in ways that pure abstraction is not. They can be measured, monitored, repaired, and replaced. Their limits are known. Their risks can be managed. The Internet works because it is grounded. That grounding requires constant attention. Cables are inspected indirectly through performance data. Repair ships remain on standby. New routes are planned years in advance. Redundancy is expanded quietly, not in response to crisis, but in anticipation of growth. None of this is visible to the people who benefit from it. When communication feels effortless, it is because enormous effort has already been invested elsewhere. When messages arrive on time, it is because systems are absorbing variation without announcing it. When failures occur without disruption, it is because someone planned for that outcome long before it happened. This is the pattern shared by all invisible backbones. They do not draw attention when they function. They recede into daily life, allowing everything built on top of them to feel simple. Their success is measured by absence rather than presence. Undersea cables embody that principle. They have reshaped how economies operate, how relationships form, and how decisions are made. They allow coordination at a scale that would have been impossible under slower systems. They compress time and distance in ways that feel natural only because they are so consistent. That consistency is not guaranteed. It depends on maintenance rather than innovation, on cooperation rather than control, on the willingness to invest in continuity even when nothing appears to be wrong. The cables beneath the ocean do not carry the internet in a metaphorical sense. They are the internet. They are the reason a message can cross an ocean without pause, the reason information feels immediate rather than delayed, the reason global systems can behave as if geography barely exists. They do this quietly, without spectacle, resting on the seabed and doing their work. That quiet persistence is what makes the digital world possible. Subscribe to The Invisible Backbone, long-form stories about the systems that quietly hold the modern world together, how they formed, why they matter, and what they are still shaping today.